Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. I have the privilege of moderating a panel that, based on the content, I know very little about. But fortunately, that we have three great panel presenters that bring a great deal of expertise to. I think we can all agree there's been quite a few changes on the front side of biomass utilization in regards to how our forest products business community accesses this raw material. How do they procure the raw material? How do we, there's been a great deal of changes, both in response to the nature of the resource itself, but also to the needs of our business community. Not easy. And with us this morning to give us some perspectives, give us, kind of a current status of where we're at on how to be better at how we represent the contracting side to our business community. We'll begin by having Matt Etzenhouser. Matt is a timber appraisal, timber sale preparation, stewardship contracting specialist for Region 2 of the U.S. Forest Service out of Denver Lakewood office. I've known Matt several years. He's a guy I go to, we get a lot of, several inquiries of new startups, for example, in Colorado that want to do something with wood products, and of course acquiring that feedstock through the federal system is something many of the newer folks that are trying to start up these businesses aren't familiar with, and Matt's a guy that I send these folks often to. So Matt will give us some of the perspectives. I think Matt's been kind of the tip of the spear for a lot of these changes in contracting, both at our state and regional and national levels. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt. He'll be joining us remotely.
Hello, my name is Matt Etzenhouser. I work for the U.S. Forest Service at the Rocky Mountain Regional Office, and I specialize in timber sale preparation, stewardship contracting, timber appraisals, and good neighbor authority. So today I would like to speak to you about some of these authorities that we are allowed to use, and in particular on how they impact the innovation in terms of utilizing small diameter material and woody biomass. And so I've prepared some slides. I'll go through these slides. They'll summarize some of the points related to each of the contracting methods. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions and discussion with the full panel. So with that, let me share my screen, and I'll get the presentation going here. So the first type of contracting instrument, doesn't appear that the slides are moving. Let me try something here. Okay. There we go. So starting with probably the most basic and also the one that's been around the longest is the traditional timber sale contract. And so this has been obviously part of the agency since its inception. And it's really a pretty confined contract in terms of what it wants to do. It's designed just to allow the transfer of property, which is timber, the timber property from the government to a purchaser, and then also, provide the protections and the operations that have to happen to make that transaction. But really, it's a pretty narrow focus, and because of that, it's not subject to the federal acquisition regulations, commonly referred to as the FAR, which has some implications about what's allowed that we'll discuss here in a minute. It also it has to be awarded to the highest responsible bidder. So really there's not a whole lot of discretion on who can get the work, who can get the contract and how that work gets done. As long as the company that's bidding on it is reasonably, has the resources to complete the work, and they're responsible, they're awarded the contract if they bid the highest price for the timber. So it's kind of a clean cut that way. And that has some implications on risk mitigation and also what can be done on the landscape. And then the other thing that's probably important in terms of innovation in utilizing small material is that only those activities that are related to the actual harvest of the timber are allowed. So if it's a activities like a service item that's not related to removal of timber, it's not allowed to be in a timber contract. So we can't like bring money into the contract and pay for extra work. It's only those things that are needed to get the timber harvested in a in a manner that protects the land and the resources on the land. That obviously that has to happen, but if it's above and beyond that, we can't require anything. So it's a little limited that way. The next type of contract is the integrated resource contract, or also referred to as stewardship contracting. And so this type of contract is newer. It was authorized for permanent use in 2014. And one of the key features is that it allows the trading of goods for services. So the value of the timber can be used to offset extra work on the landscape to pay for that work. So that it kind of makes it more efficient where everything can get done in one entry. The scope of work that can be done is bigger also. So basically anything that has to deal with restoration, so ecological benefits for the water, the soil, the forest, vegetation, or wildlife can be kind of included as stewardship projects, and those can be added in addition to what's required to remove the timber. So that allows us more flexibility on treating the landscape. And oftentimes the smaller diameter material doesn't have a high value, so that work tends to be subsidized or requires extra funding to get it done. So this contract does allow for those kind of extra funds to be added. With the IRSC contract, which is, okay, let me describe, there's a little distinction between the two. They're both stewardship contracts, but an IRSC contract would be an integrated resource service contract. And that would be where the service work costs more than the value of the timber. So we're going to have to, be required to add extra funding to get that project done. Whereas an IRTC would be where the timber value is higher than the service value. So the timber can cover all the work that needs to be done. Plus there'll be a little extra retained receipts above that the agency will keep for future projects. So because of the IRSC is a service majority, it falls within the FAR regulations, and that means service contract wage rates apply and all that stuff that normal federal government procurement requires. Whereas the IRTC is considered a timber contract, but it also has some aspects of the FAR, in particular the best value awarding process, which can be pretty beneficial. So it has, I guess you could say it probably has the best of both worlds in that regard. Let me explain a little bit about what the best of value awarding process is. It basically allows the Forest Service to select who will be awarded the contract based on evaluation criteria other than just price. So with a timber sale, it's pretty much whoever pays the most for the timber will get the work. Whereas with the best value, you can also include, consider other aspects like will the local workforce be utilized, or will they be able to make markets for small diameter material? And you can kind of prioritize those activities as being important to the project. And then a bidder, when they submit their proposal, if they can show that they plan to use small diameter material, they can be given a higher priority, even though that particular contractor might cost more to get the work done. It's a better value overall for the government to be able to utilize that small material and create those markets. So we have discretion in that way to not just necessarily go with the lowest price. So that can be pretty beneficial, especially when you're trying to develop markets. You can provide those incentives to utilize small diameter material. The next type of instrument would be the stewardship agreement. And so it's very similar to a stewardship contract, the same idea that we can trade goods for services and have extra service work. And the restoration, ecological restoration can be part of the work that's done on the landscape. What's different about agreements, though, is that they don't fall within the FAR regulations. They have a whole another set of regulations that deal with grants and agreements for the federal agencies. And they tend to be not as it's not a competitive environment so much, because usually we're partnering with nonprofit agencies or other local governments or those kind of groups that aren't necessarily, they're not in business for a profit, so they're not competing for work. They're just taking advantage of opportunities where their mission aligns with our mission, and we can, negotiate a project on the ground and then put our efforts together to get it done. So because of that, we have a lot of flexibility on being able to modify contracts modify the agreement once it's in place. We can change things to adapt as conditions change. That could include prices, that could include scope of work, it could include the product that we're trying to sell or utilize. So that gives a lot more flexibility in that regard. It does require a 20% match from the partner for a stewardship agreement. And we move on to the next type of instrument, which would be the Good Neighbor Authority. So this is the newest one that we have in our toolbox. And it basically allows partnering with state agencies or tribal or county governments to do cross-boundary work. We include all jurisdictions within a treatment area, all ownerships that are interested in being involved can then all be put under one contract, and the work can all be done seamlessly, which has a lot of benefits in terms of efficiency and saving on fixed costs. Because of that, let me talk a little, excuse me, I organize my thoughts here, but let me talk a little bit about how that efficiency comes about. So that there could be, say, some acres of federal land that need to be treated, and then adjacent to that or nearby, there's some other ownership, state land or private land, that also would need the same treatment. And if you were to break those up and have individual contracts for each of those to get done, there's quite a bit of fixed cost for each one. So the equipment has to be moved in, the contract has to be prepared and put out for solicitation and then awarded and administered, and all that amount of work tends to be the same no matter if you treat 20 acres or you treat 100 acres. A lot of that cost is going to be the same. So if you can spread it out over more acres and more volume, you can reduce that fixed cost. So they bring in the equipment and treat the whole landscape while they're there. Do it under one contract with one contractor. You don't have to put it out for another solicitation. So all that stuff can really help make it more feasible financially. There's also aspects of the partners might have relationships with the other landowners that would help facilitate projects. So maybe a particular landowner wouldn't want to work with the federal government, but they're willing to work with the state partner to provide access across their land, or to work under a state contract that they're familiar with the state contract and they don't want to have anything to do with the federal contract. So it kind of bring in more ownerships too into the project. And then one final thing I would mention on that is that if you can bring in more acres and more volume, you might be able to attract purchasers and operators that would normally not even look at a project if it's below a certain threshold, just because of the effort they have to put into bid and all that. If they tend to have to look at the bigger projects to make it work for themselves. So this can actually bring in more operators to the market. And then finally, I would just say with Good Neighbor Authority, it's really variable across states and even within states. There's a lot of different ways this is being used, and a lot of different state contracts and capacities within each state. So it's hard to make a blanket statement about Good Neighbor Authority since it is such a variable situation going on. And then to wrap up, I just wanted to compare some of these instruments in terms of treatment efficiency. And then I have another slide where I'll compare in terms of market development. But this particular one is about treatment efficiency and looking at the different instrument types. So subsidizing the treatment, which would be the ability to bring funding in to cover some of the extra work that's not related to timber removal. And that can help by developing new markets, because it can, get that wood at least to the road or to the landing where it could be transported to be utilized, whereas it might not have enough value to get the, skidding and yarding the material out of the woods. So with a traditional timber sale contract, it's not possible to bring in extra funding to get the work done. So basically, whatever the product is, it has to have enough value there to pay to get itself out of the woods. With a stewardship contract, we do have that ability to bring in funding, so that could be appropriated federal funds, or that could be partner contributions that are partners that are interested in having work done in the landscape. And then obviously the value of the timber can also be then put back into paying for some of this non-commercial work. One thing I'd mentioned about the partner funding, especially a good example would be here in the Front Range, where we have water providers that are really interested in fuel reduction within their watersheds. And so that's a pretty good funding source for a couple of our forests, where we'll be able to use that money, put it into a stewardship agreement to get fuel reduction treatments done, or even stewardship contracts. So we can bring in that extra funding to get work done, and it benefits both the water provider and the agency. And then finally, the good neighbor agreement. Like I said, that can be quite variable, and a lot of times it depends on the state contract, but we can add federal funds, and we can add partner funding. And one aspect that would be unique to the Good Neighbor Authority is that it would then also is eligible for funding that would be available for non-federal lands. So obviously those couldn't be spent on the National Forest System land, but if it was put into adjacent private or other ownerships, that could help defer that fixed cost and make the project more viable. So those type of funds are also available under Good Neighbor. Scope of work allowed. So obviously with the timber contract, the only thing that's allowed is what's required to get the timber harvested and to protect the resource. IRSC and IRTC, I guess I could say this, make the statement for all three types: the stewardship contract, stewardship agreement, and the Good Neighbor Authority can all basically do any kind of work as long as it's related to ecological restoration objective or water quality. So any of those kind of environmental benefits can pretty much be done with any of those instruments. So pretty broad amount of or scope of work that can be done. And finally, the cross-boundary efficiency with the timber contract and with the stewardship contract, it's really not possible. The only way you could do it is just have two separate contracts and all the inefficiencies that go along with that. With the stewardship agreement, it is a little more amiable to having cross-boundary work, because you have that nonprofit partner involved that could then kind of facilitate the work across the boundaries and put it all under maybe one of their subcontracts, but they would be on the hook for the federal, performing on the federal lands, whoever that nonprofit partner is. And then they could subcontract work to do cross-boundary stuff, but it wouldn't be quite as seamless as what you'd see with a Good Neighbor agreement. And then just to wrap up here, comparing the different instruments in terms of risk to market development. The flexibility in product utilization can be a pretty important thing, especially if there's not a lot of certainty on whether the product will have value. Being able to kind of change midstream can be a good benefit. So with the timber contract, the only real instrument we have available is there's two provisions in there called timber subject to agreement and optional removal. And these provisions would allow, like the subject to agreement allows the purchaser to say, decide whether they want the material or not. And if they don't want it, then it stays on the stump, and it just stays out in the stand. If they do want it, then they'll pay for whatever the price is and cut it and remove it. So that for that questionable material, that could be a good provision to include. The optional removal would be where they have to cut it and bring it to the landing, but then they don't have to haul it away from the landing. So that it saves them the haul cost basically. So that can be another option available. With stewardship agreements and contracts, there's more flexibility in terms of how we define the scope of work, so we can define that so that the smaller butt diameter material doesn't have to be utilized. We can give like a few options on how to deal with that stuff. So that can kind of help mitigate some of that product that's questionable, whether it will have value or not. We can also design those into optional units. And the way those work is they're only executed if the Forest Service decides we're going to pay for those to get them done, then we would tell the purchaser and they would have to do that. So we could have that discretion of not requiring those optional units to be done. And then just finally, as is common with a lot of these aspects with the Good Neighbor Authority, pretty much depends on the state contract on how much flexibility they would allow. And also just backing up between the agreement that we have, the Forest Service with the state partner or with the tribal or county partner, there is a lot of flexibility that you have just with the normal agreement process where we can change things that way. Once it becomes under a contract with through the state, then they're locked in to what needs to be done. So maximum contract term dates. This aspect can be pretty important, especially if you're trying to minimize the risk of new investment and industries in the market area. So if a potential mill investor can have 20 years of supply pretty much guaranteed, then that helps them get loans for their mill, or can provide a supply to keep until they get to that break-even point. So it can kind of minimize a lot of that risk. So with the timber contract, maximum duration is 10 years with the approval from the chief. With the stewardship contracting, we can go up to 20 years. On an IRSC and IRTC, we can only go 10 years. And then stewardship agreements, we're allowed to go to the 20 years also. With Good Neighbor Authority, we're limited to the 10-year under the master agreement. So that would be about the maximum we could go with Good Neighbor Authority. And finally, the last one I wanted to look at was social license. And it kind of goes along a spectrum with the traditional timber sale. There's not a lot of collaboration. And because of the objectives are pretty narrow in terms of merchantable material, a lot of times that would probably be the lowest social license. Whereas with stewardship agreements and contracts, you have more collaboration, and that can tend to bring in the community, and the goals are broader too. So you can get more public support for that type of thing. And then with Good Neighbor, I would say it's the same as a stewardship agreement, except it probably has a little advantage in that doing the cross-boundary work would allow, maybe more public support, because they would like to see that, effective landscape treatment across all boundaries. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the moderator. And then, like I said, I'll be available for questions at the end. Thank you.
As Matt said, we'll kind of hold to our format of holding the questions till all of our panelists have had a chance to provide their expertise. So next, I'm going to ask Molly Pitts to come up here. Molly's she's executive director of our Colorado Timber Industry Association. She's the principal guidance advocacy role for our industry, in particular on providing that guidance to some of these authorities that Matt spoke about. She'll represent, how are these things working in the woods with our timber operators. She's been a leader in Colorado in forest management policy development, industry advocacy. As I said, we've had a great working relationship with her through the Colorado State Forest Service and our federal partners. And I'm sure we're going to be all benefit by what she has to say here this morning. So, thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Tim. Is there a clicker? Perfect. Well, while we're waiting for my presentation, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Molly Pitts, and I I wear several different hats, and I wanted to kind of go over them briefly just so that you have some context of where I'm coming from regarding this. So I serve as the executive director for the Colorado Timber Industry Association. And we're a trade association started in 1986, and it's made up of small family-owned businesses committed to logging, service work, or manufacturing in Colorado. It was originally put together kind of as an association to deal with workman's comp, and there was a dividend program. But even after that went away, the association stayed, and we're an advocacy group. We advocate for our members at the state, local, state, and federal level. And we do a lot of different things. One area we really focus on is safety. I do a monthly safety flyer. We also work closely with the state legislature. We host a legislative reception, and we participate in the forest hearing every year. And we also are really big on logger education. So we do continuing education classes for our loggers every year. And not all loggers in Colorado, but the majority of loggers in Colorado are certified. So we're pretty proud of that. I also am the Colorado Programs Manager for Intermountain Forest Association. So whereas CTIA is at the state level, IFA is at the Region 2 level. And Region 2 covers Colorado, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Kansas, although I don't work much in Kansas because there's not very many trees. But IFA works very closely with each of the national forests to ensure that those forests are meeting the needs of the industry. So I work closely with the timber program managers for each forest. Lucky me, I spend a lot of time reading NEPA. And I do that for multiple reasons, which is to make sure that the projects they are doing are economical and can be implemented, but also to ensure that they're not putting design criteria that are eventually going to make projects not feasible. So we're not against design criteria. I participate on the state BMP monitoring team in Colorado. We're firm advocates of it. But we also think that there's some things that can be done with design criteria that will make projects more feasible in the long term. So, and I'll get into a little bit more specifics, but operating restrictions, whether it's, timing or hauling restrictions, have a big impact on our industry. So the other committee that I am involved with is the Federal Timber Purchasers Committee, and not very many people have heard of it, but it's been around for a long time. It was formed back in 1962 by the Secretary of Ag, and really his whole purpose was to have a committee of industry folks that could have that one-on-one relationship with the Forest Service and then later the BLM to discuss contracts. At the time, the timber sale contract was pretty much the main mechanism for moving wood off of national forests. But as you saw from Matt's presentation, and he did a great job of kind of laying out all the different contracting mechanisms, but it provided that feedback loop. So it's been around a long time, and we've grown in kind of the stuff that we do, but we look at what mechanisms can help gain efficiencies for the Forest Service. We also provide feedback on new legislation that comes down. And like most recently, the Forest Service is in the process of revising their handbook and manuals. Now, I am pretty sure very few of you in this room have ever read a Forest Service handbook or manual. Maybe Jim Utes, maybe a few others. But, and it's not a lot of fun, but it's the nuts and bolts of how the Forest Service does their work. And we don't get an opportunity very often to revise those. So we took this as an opportunity to be very much involved, and we provided comments on the first 2 batches, and we'll continue to do so. And the reason we do that is because we're trying to help the Forest Service do their work better, but also meet the needs of industry. So not glamorous work, but super important work. So I wanted to provide a little bit of history, and I'm going to talk mainly about Colorado because that's where I cover, but this statistic is pretty common throughout the Southwest. So on the left-hand side, you see the number of active Colorado sawmills from 1982 to 2016. There was a 64% decrease in the number of sawmills in Colorado. And this is just Colorado, but the same statistics, like I said, can be found in the Four Corners report, which is put together by the University of Montana's Bureau of Business and, I always get it wrong, Economic Research. Thank you, Tim. And on the right-hand side, you see logging on public lands and how much the volume coming off dropped at that same time. There's a direct correlation, and so we know that. But what we also have to do is look at history and see how we can maybe not repeat ourselves. Keeping the industry we have is super important. Brent Racher's opening comments yesterday were kind of depressing, but it's reality. And if we lose industry, it's really hard to get it back. And so I wanted to provide this context because I think it's important for us to recognize that I'm going to talk a lot about contracts, but that's how work actually gets done out there. And if they're not fair and transparent and easy to utilize, we're going to lose our industry. So this is just a picture from the Four Corners report, kind of showing all the different industries we have in Colorado. So sawmills, veneer, post and pole, house log, we have it all. And I think that's really important. We saw during the Great Recession of 2008-9 what happens when one market, so at that time that was the housing market, right, and the stud market goes, if that's all you have, then your timber industry is not going to survive long term. I'm glad to see we have a variety of products because they typically don't all fail at the same time. And it allows the industry to stay somewhat healthy when we have a variety of markets. So some harvesting statistics. So 71% of the forest lands in Colorado are national forests. And that's really important. And at the same time, 64% of the harvest comes from national forests. And on average, 80% of the wood we harvest in Colorado is saw timber. 20% of the forest lands are privately owned, yet almost 30% of the harvest comes from private lands. And then 9% are owned or managed by other public agencies, which are state and tribal. 3% of the harvest came from state lands, and 3% of the harvest came from other public lands, not tribal. So our tribal lands in Colorado don't really add much to the harvest. But I did think it was interesting that even though private lands are only 20% of the landscape, 30% of the harvest comes from that, which is interesting but also important as we talk about why good neighbor and other mechanisms are so crucial. So Matt did a great job of providing an overview of all the different federal contracting mechanisms, and I'm going to give you a perspective from an industry why some are better than others from our perspective, or just more the pros and cons. So timber sales, like I said, have been around for a really long time. They're our oldest contracting mechanism, and with that comes consistency, and we know what's in them. Fire liability. Here in the Southwest, fires started from treatments are not uncommon, and the timber sale contract is very clear on whose liability that is and the mechanisms and the protocols for dealing with that. That is super important. It also has like emergency rate redetermination. So if anybody went to Home Depot this year, or if you're involved in the wood industry, you saw the market do crazy things over the past 24 months. Well, timber sales, and Matt didn't talk about this a lot, but appraisals are part of the timber sale process, and that's based on the current wood market. Well, what happens when you bid on a sale when the market's high and then the market goes down? Well, when it goes down a certain percentage, the Forest Service has to do an emergency rate redetermination, which is actually really helpful for our industry folks, because if you buy when the market's high and then the price goes down, your sale may no longer be economical. So having the emergency rate redetermination is super important. Market-related contract term addition is also kind of another safety measure. So if you buy a timber sale and the place that you were gonna take the wood burns or is out of business, you're eligible for market-related contract term addition. And it just kind of provides another assurance to the people who buy the wood that they're gonna have some flexibility. And lastly, SOPI. So SOPI stands for Significant Overriding Public Interest. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we had no idea what was gonna happen. And so they issued a SOPI, which SOPI basically gives people some additional time on their contracts if they choose to take it. Now, fortunately, the wood market didn't crash like we thought it might. In fact, it went the complete opposite way, but that was there as a safety measure. So what are some cons for timber sales? Well, like I said, NEPA, and a lot of times our purchasers aren't involved with NEPA, and that's where like I come in. I'm there to help look at the design criteria and the things that get put into NEPA, which then have to get carried into our contracts. And design criteria, operating restrictions have a big deal. One of my things in NEPA that I look for is all the different operating restrictions. So whether it's for threatened and endangered species or winter habitat for elk and deer. But one project I reviewed, literally by the time you put all the overlapping timing restrictions, there was an operating period of about a month. And it was a large project. So basically you're asking a contractor to mobilize their equipment, work for a month, and then mobilize their equipment back out, and do this for a period of years. It's not economical. And so we have to look for ways that we can gain some efficiency while still meeting the needs on the landscape. Like I mentioned, appraisals. Honestly, from the industry perspective, Forest Service appraisal process is a black hole. Like it's a black box, like numbers go in, numbers come out, but we're not really sure how the appraisals are done. And a lot of times we disagree with the numbers that come out. And we're working to improve that. Matt mentioned mandatory removal. If I'm a post and pole operator and I buy a sale that has product that I can't utilize, it's not very helpful. And so one of the things that we really push is that not to have mandatory removal of certain sizes or species, because depending on your local market, you may or may not be able to move that wood. Surface rock replacement. Our road network is in bad shape pretty much on every national forest. Yet we're one of the few users who actually pay to use those roads. And surface rock replacement can be a big deal depending on the project, the miles of road. It can add a significant cost. Hauling restrictions. Pretty much every sale doesn't allow hauling on the weekends. Well, we get that if it's a high-use recreational area, but sometimes there's nobody else out there. And so having a hauling restriction on the weekends doesn't make a lot of sense. And then with the SOPI, while I talked about how it was beneficial, you also had to sign a secondary liability waiver that gave away a lot of your rights. And honestly, some of our industry said the additional contract time wasn't worth the liability waiver you asked me to sign. So from an IRTC and an IRSC perspective, the pros is it's payment for services or goods for services, right? So we're now paying people to do the work that doesn't necessarily equate to a product, which is great. We get long-term contracts. We get a lot of work done under one contract. It brings in some partner funding, and there's a variety of products. On the con side, timber sales are advertised in a very specific way, and most of our purchasers are used to it. IRTCs and IRSCs fall under procurement. It's a whole different bidding process. And along with that, I'd like to say it's complex, but really what I'd like to say is not transparent. And Matt used the word best value, and that's the word that they go back to time and time again, which is it's whatever's the best value for the government. Unfortunately, best value is not always described or detailed out. So if I'm a purchaser trying to bid on a stewardship contract, I don't always know what that means. And part of that is there's evaluation criteria, and that's, you know, local workforce, benefits to local communities, your overall price. And one of the things that we've done with FTPC is now in the handbook and manual, they're going to have to tell you what is the most important evaluation criteria. Because the reality is a lot of times it was price, but you'd spend a lot of time writing your proposal about other things, which at the end of the day, nobody really cared about, and it still came down to price. Optional work. So some projects have a lot of optional work that never going to get implemented, but they throw them in there in the off chance, like this year, it's gonna rain money, and they're gonna get that extra work done. But again, it's very time consuming to put together a bid on this optional work when it may or may not ever get utilized. Long-term contracts is a good thing unless there's not flexibility in it or there's not the ability to make changes. So think how much fuel has gone up just in the last year. If the contract doesn't have a fuel cost adjustment, the price you provided a year ago may not be economical now. And so we have to be able to make sure that there's those types of mechanisms built into the contract to ensure that your price is still gonna be good. Wages. So IRSCs fall under procurement, which a lot of times means it falls under Davis-Bacon wages. And so this is a wage requirement that may or may not make an economical project. So it's something to keep in mind. And then lastly, from Colorado, we have a small but mighty industry. And sometimes IRSCs start including work like putting in a toilet or doing other types of work. As an industry, we're not prepared to do it, but more importantly, it doesn't meet the needs of why we're doing the project, which is a lot of time to get wood, logs, to a sawmill. And so when you're asking us to take time to do a project that isn't gonna necessarily benefit the end result, it can be super challenging for the industry. And we're not opposed to putting in bathrooms. We think they're important on the landscape as well, but we need time. And so don't go from one bathroom this year to 30 next year as part of your process. And that has happened, especially with things like the Great American Outdoors Act, which brought in a lot of additional funding to do some cool stuff, but it may or, they're including this stuff in contracts that may or may not make sense. Good neighbor authority. So I'm very pleased that we have it. And honestly, in Colorado, we wouldn't have the program that we have now without good neighbor authority. It allows for cross-boundary work. It increases access. I visited a project earlier this fall that went through private land to access BLM and Forest Service land. Without that private landowner providing that access, none of those acres would have gotten treated. So super important. It increases the capacity and it potentially adds more volume. But some of the same cons are on this, how do they get advertised? Fire liability. I will tell you, and I'm gonna give Rich Edwards a lot of kudos. So when Colorado was developing their master agreement for Good Neighbor, Rich basically took a timber sale contract from the Forest Service and copied it. And so the fire liability that is in Colorado Good Neighbor agreements is awesome. The same is not true everywhere. And we're running into huge issues with that. And so if you do good neighbor work in a state other than Colorado, I really encourage you to go back and look at your fire liability and what it protects and what it doesn't. It doesn't also, some of them don't have a cancellation clause. So in Montana, a lot of times purchasers do a lot of road work up front to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, if the state cancels that contract for any reason, there's no way to recoup those costs. And so things like that make the industry very, hesitant to bid on good neighbor projects because of the lack of coverage. And again, it's about capacity and road use agreements. So in Colorado, we had a national forest require it. They gave the sale to the state to implement. State turned around and told them they had to have a road use agreement for the national forest road that they were using to haul national forest timber out. It made us all kind of scratch our heads and go, well, what is the benefit of this being a good neighbor project then? So just things like that we look out for. Master stewardship agreements, we get more work done. It's great about bringing additional dollars. Some of the cons, though, is that it truly is a black box and lack of transparency in some places. Advertisements. So the federal government is required to advertise their projects a certain way. When they have a master stewardship agreement, and let's say the work is going to now be done by TNC or the National Wild Turkey Federation, they don't have to follow any of those same processes. And so they may or may not use the active bidder list. We have industry all the time tell us, I had no idea that sale was going out because I wasn't notified. That's a big issue. And what it actually does is decreases competition, and it decreases the long-term effectiveness of that master stewardship agreement. Again, fire liability and cancellation clause. Those same contracts may or may not have the protection. So just some key lessons learned. Economics is important. Mobilization is one of the biggest expenses on a project, and that's where those operating restrictions and things come in. You have to offer the right product mix. Unit sizes are something I look at a lot. Road packages, and simple is better, and I keep it simple, stupid, is the KISS thing, but we're a big fan of D by P, which is designation by prescription or designation by description, until you guys make it really difficult, like the Forest Service or the BLM make it really difficult. And then our industry is left trying to implement a project that's taking them way more time than if it had just been marked. And the same with virtual boundaries. It's a new efficiency that we can use unless you guys make it really difficult. And then people make a difference. Inexperienced and difficult personnel isn't great for industry. I've got a member who flat out refuses to buy Forest Service timber anymore and only wants to do NRCS work because the timber sale administrator on that particular forest seems like they have an axe to grind, and they show up every day waiting to write a ticket or their inspection report. That's not helpful. We're not out to take advantage of the government, but we have to get work done as well. And then just the high rate of employee turnover. Folks laugh when I say we spend a lot of time training federal employees, and it's not super helpful. And hopefully long term we're going to address this, but there's just so much turnover that it seems like we're always breaking in somebody new. So with that, I'm very excited about the Ponzi project on Monarch. And I will tell you that this came about because the forest plan on the Pike San Isabel allowed for high flotation equipment. And it's, again, just one of those other restrictions that we look for, whether it's the forest plan or at the project level. What kind of restrictions are you putting in that's going to make it less competitive for folks to bid on, or just, make it so they only have to use a certain type of equipment? So with that.
All right, thanks, Molly. I think our next presenter had a little bit of a vehicle mishap on his way here. So I think there's still a chance he'll be arriving. So we're gonna, in order to take advantage of that possibility, we're gonna bump up some of our presentations in panel number 6, myself and Carmen, to be a part of this panel, and then hopefully we'll be able to, Andrew will be able to arrive and give us his presentation later. So,
Is there any questions for me? Because I won't be around.
Damon, can we? Yeah, well, okay, yeah, let's do a quick Q&A for Matt and Molly, and then we'll do that. That's a pretty good idea. So, I don't know, Damon, if you've got, want to go audience or online?
Maybe this is for both Molly and Matt, but Molly, you mentioned unit sizes, and we're kind of hearing that, at least in the San Juan, that there's more flexibility to smaller units, smaller treatment areas, and more creativity there. Can you just say a little bit more about what you're seeing?
Sure. So one of the things that we advocate at the industry level is that there's a variety of project sizes, right? Because, you know, like you talked about, you're a small operator, and so do you want to go purchase a 1,000-acre sale? No. And so, but we also know that there's bigger companies that have, you know, they gain efficiencies by working at that larger level. So we think every forest should have a variety of projects in different sizes to meet the needs of the local industry. Now, if you're not on the landscape and you only have a large sawmill, does it make sense to have small projects? Maybe or maybe not. And it's part of knowing your local industry, but also recognizing that the wood basket, like for Colorado, is quite large. So, you know, our big sawmills haul wood long distances, and they have to because of the size of the sawmill and the efficiency they gain that way. So it's about knowing not only your local, but kind of your regional industry and making sure that you're meeting the needs of that. And if you're not, you know, let's have that communication and get that feedback to the Forest Service.
Yeah, well, prices is down price.
Yeah, this is a question for Molly and maybe Matt. So on the traditional timber sales, we saw a pro being ERR and MRCTA. What is industry's take on escalation as well?
I'll give you my perspective, and then I'm sure Matt will have a different perspective. So escalation, if you understand it, is both a good and a bad thing, right? So if you're able to purchase a sale when the market's down, and you don't bid a lot on top of it, then you're doing really well. But if you buy when the market's down and then you bid it up quite a bit, so that bid premium is a lot, and then the market goes up, you can find yourself in quite the pickle. And I usually find that escalation bites people when they're inexperienced, it's their first sale, and they didn't really understand what they were doing. And so that's where associations are super important for folks to reach out to, but also if you have questions, make sure you ask so that you understand, like, well, if it's too good of a deal, if it seems like too good of a deal, it usually is, right? And so, and we've seen, I mean, the market this year has been crazy, highs and lows, and so escalation can be, it can be challenging. Matt, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, good. Yeah, I agree with Molly with what you just said. I think that's a good explanation. And kind of my impression is there has been times when certain partners in the industry have asked to go flat rate, which is when you don't have escalation, especially when we were doing a lot of salvage. And so we tried to probe and see if there was interest in that or if that would make sense. And it's pretty mixed. You know, some purchasers really like it and some don't. But my impression is that the majority like it, you know, and they'd like to have it there. And then one thing I would just add is that from my standpoint, I've been working to try to make it more accurate in terms of like reflecting the actual markets, because it's a pretty sensitive system. It's either like fully at the minimum rate or fully at the maximum rate, but just a little bit of a change in lumber index, and that can be not necessarily marked or match the actual value in the market. So I think there's some issues with that can be, could make it a little better. But overall, I think most folks like it and want to keep it. think I didn't hear any audio at the end there. I think I lost it. So I guess we're done. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thanks Molly and Matt. And as I said, we'll kind of go into the change in our format just a little bit. The SWERI, as Hans said a little bit yesterday, is kind of a regional effort, cooperative effort among New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. So as you look at our next panel, that Carmen and I were asked to just kind of do a tag team presentation, give you quick updates from each of our states in the context of kind of the pre-post pandemic situation that we're in. So I'll go ahead. I introduced myself yesterday, but for those of you that may not have been here, I'm the Biomass Program Utilization Program Specialist for the Colorado State Forest Service. Came aboard the Colorado State Forest Service back in 2000. I work out of our Durango field office doing statewide, basically extension, delivery, economic assistance, technical assistance to Colorado's timber industry and business sector. In the context of providing you guys some update, what's been going on the last couple of years. One of the first updates we're excited about is we announced, I believe yesterday or the day before, our new state forester and director of the Colorado State Forest Service is going to be Matthew McCombs. Matthew comes from the U.S. Forest Service, Gunnison National Forest in Colorado, Western Slope. He'll be taking on his new role with our State Forest Service after the first of the year. So Matt brings a lot of good background, federal agency, a lot of what we talked here this morning about. So we're excited to have Matt on board as our new leader moving forward. Industry-wise, we saw a lot of dynamics during the pandemic on markets, and for the most part, I think that our industry benefited pretty well, took advantage of those. We were still aggressive in putting out our fuels treatments and our timber sales and things like that. And in Colorado, we just frankly have more work than we have people to do it. So anecdotally, I heard from a few of our industry partners related to some cash flow disruptions regarding COVID. Couple of our facilities had little mini outbreaks, if you will, and were forced to shut down for a while their employees recovered. But I would say that the biggest change during the pandemic from what I've been doing, where I spend my time, is workforce. It was always a problem in Colorado. Molly's got a great demographic statistic of the age breakdown of people in our log truck driving sector, sawmill, and loggers. And it is pretty daunting. And that was always there. I think the pandemic just made it very imperative because workforce is affecting, the good news is workforce is affecting all the business sectors in Colorado. And that's allowed Molly and I to pursue a lot of great resources in the economic development community to see which one of those programmatically might help address workforce in our industry. The bad news is that everybody is suffering through workforce, not just our timber industry. So, but that's been bringing that to the forefront as I began to make my sawmill visits again coming out of the pandemic. A lot of our mills are making expansions, small mills, large mills. We're seeing, a really healthy entrepreneurship develop in Colorado. Saw an example of that with Andy from Timber Age yesterday, and there's several other businesses across Colorado really adapting to the needs of the market. So we're seeing interest in small startups across the state. But again, a lot of our more traditional, conventional sawmills are investing quite a bit as well. And what they they're at least telling me, is workforce. They can't find an appropriate, educated, trained, skilled workforce. So I think that that's, again, it was always there as a challenge, but I think the pandemic has just brought that to the forefront. In terms of our agency, we're going to benefit as well by some of the post-pandemic assistance stimulus dollars. We have expanded our financial assistance to our forest products industry in Colorado in the form of we can actually make loans to businesses, startups, or existing businesses, and we can also offer a small grants program as well. So that's kind of represents an increased capacity of our utilization effort and outreach to our industry. A colleague of mine, Kurt Mackus, was planning to be here. He works in Washington. But one of the things I was gonna have Kurt tell you about, we're excited about, we're gonna put on staff a new biomass specialist, and one of the things that they're gonna be responsible for is Colorado's going to undertake a statewide biomass assessment. We've done some market studies in the past of Colorado and wood products, where they're coming, where they're going. But this will represent probably, as far as I know, the first comprehensive effort and assessment to quantify supply, quantify our industry capacity, integrate those two things. We're gonna, a lot of interest in valuation through carbon, climate protocols. We're gonna be taking a dive into that. So, economic development communities, we work closely with those folks in Colorado. They've been an enormous asset. So that assessment is actually beginning now. We'll put on our new biomass specialist here in the coming weeks. So we hope to gain a lot of actionable intelligence, if you will, for our industry, for our forest managers. As Molly said, we're kind of a small but mighty industry, but we hope to provide, kind of a roadmap for greater investment in our business community, decision support tools to help communities make decisions on, what type of infrastructure is consistent with my community based on where we're at with our forest conditions, our wildfire threats. So integrating those two aspects within this biomass assessment will be pretty exciting for us. With that, like I say, just a brief update. I'm going to ask Carmen to come up and, as our host state, give an update of what things are going on with New Mexico Division of Forestry, and particularly in relation to some of the utilization aspects, challenges, opportunities that she sees.
Thanks, Tim. I've got a little bit of a presentation. Ooh, this is a different one. But it's just okay. I have a little bit of a presentation or a PowerPoint to share with you all. My name is Carmen Austin. I'm with New Mexico Forestry Division. My title is Climate Change Specialist, so I'm not a dedicated biomass and utilization specialist, and I'm certainly not an expert, but boy, do I work with a great team where if you have any questions, and it doesn't matter if it's here in New Mexico, if you're across the state line, if you're, this morning I visited with Wallapai from Arizona. It's just easy to have that connection when you're native and you're visiting with other natives. You just gravitate together, and we share that information. Tim and I and others in this room, we're part of the Council of Western State Foresters Forest Utilization Network. So when I don't know something, boy, do I turn to others who know, what can they do to share, their expertise with industry that needs that assistance. So anyhow, we'll just continue. So I don't think that I really have a whole lot to share with you regarding New Mexico forest industry. I think Brent did a very, very good job of what, where we're at in New Mexico. And just as with what Molly has shared and what Tim has shared with us, we're pretty much in the same boat. We're surviving and we're doing the best we can. Our New Mexico Forest Industry Association, I'm just going to put in a little, a little plug here. This is what our forest industry map looks like. It's not as detailed as what Molly had presented. It identifies contractors, the firewood vendors, and sawmills. And I think we need to expand this because it certainly doesn't include just those entities. Here soon enough, we're talking about prescribed fire. So we're looking at firefighters as well. And that might even develop into other items that are beyond my thought right now. But this is what it looks like. Small and mighty, I think. And it's throughout New Mexico. And I know for a fact that a lot of New Mexicans do work across state boundaries in Arizona, particularly in Eager. And then we have the northern area that works with southern Colorado. And, you see, I think 103 is a fire vendor. I know he will get firewood from all the areas that you see west and north, and his market is in Texas. So there is RC Forest Products, who's in the room, Mr. Ruben Carrion. I know that he works south of the border. So we're covering all the areas that we possibly can, and I think these guys are doing an incredible job. But we'll certainly expand this map, and as businesses come into New Mexico, we'll continue to expand our abilities to assist them and expand the map. One of the things we've done in the last couple years is we certainly addressed restoration economy, which includes industry, into our forest action plan. We know that we don't do our work without industry. It's just as simple as that. I think it's been recognized, in previous action plans, but certainly it has become one of our strategies. And you can see, and I won't read them all, but you'll see the three action items that we have listed below. And really what it boils down to, just as Brent and I think Molly certainly mentioned this, and I know Tim agrees with me, behind every healthy forest is, there is a healthy forest industry. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about this, and we'll continue to expand on this as well. This is, the Forest Action Plan is updated every 10 years. This was just last year, so we'll be working on this again here in the next few years, and hopefully it's going to get better, bigger and better. Another plug, part of SWRI is New Mexico Highlands Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute. In the room is Dr. M. Barton. He's the new director with the Restoration Institute. And Alan and I had met via Zoom a couple weeks ago, and we were discussing a new position that he has advertised, economist, forest restoration and utilization. Back, it's been several years ago when Kent Reed had this idea, and he brought in the Forest Industry Association. He brought in, I think, the Forest Service and ourselves at Forestry Division, State Forestry Division, and we discussed these duties and responsibilities. Alan and I talked about it again, and I think what's really important is to have that person who wants to sit down and discuss things and help forest industry one-to-one. Someone who can get on the ground, somebody who can be with that industry member. And I think my feeling is to identify that here within that these duties and responsibilities. But Alan has other bosses, and he's got other people that he has to to satisfy. So I hope maybe some changes will be made, but in the meanwhile, he's going to continue to try to find somebody who can assist industry. And that will be, somebody that will have all these experiences that I don't have. And we'll certainly pull them in with the Council of Western Foresters, we'll pull them in on the SWRI team, et cetera. So there is, bigger and better things happening. And the last thing, I just wanted to present this to you from what I learned I think if Ian is in the room, we acquired this information from Ian Fox here at the regional office. This is what to expect from the infrastructure bill. I won't read I won't read it all, but boy, there's a lot of money coming in here to the to Region 3, probably Region 2 as well. So we're pretty excited. I think we'll just continue expanding our abilities, and in years to come, it's going to be bigger and better. And I think that's it, unless you guys have any questions for Tim and myself.
One thing I neglected to mention, probably that I wanted to as part of our state update, is we're also kind of during this pandemic time, we saw the kind of implementation of something called the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative in Colorado. That's a broad level Colorado-based multi-landscape, pace and scale, as you might expect. But it's allowed, for instance, Molly and I sit on a couple of the subcommittees related to biomass utilization and workforce development. It's allowed, at least from my standpoint, for us to have conversations with much higher levels of our state and federal government on bringing an awareness of our industry. And we're having conversations I probably wouldn't be able to initiate myself in my role in the State Forest Service. So that's been pretty exciting. There's, we have a website for RMRI if you'd like to look it up. 3 project areas, large landscapes, Southwest Colorado, kind of South Central Colorado, Arkansas River Valley, and then Upper South Platte along the Front Range. So great variety of stakeholders and partners. So just wanted to make you guys aware of that and open it up for any questions from the audience or online. And otherwise, I believe we'll probably be going to break.